creative friends, it's Gwen. Today we are talking mini albums. I have been working on these three cuties for some time now. I am obsessed and I wanted to share with you how I made them. They were inspired by this share on the Simple Stories blog by Andrea Lake. She did have some basic measurements, but no sort of tutorial on how to create them. So I've just guessed, but I want to share with you step by step how I made them so that you can make some too. The album covers are made from acetate, but because I was guessing here, I thought it best to create a template first. Be sure to screenshot this here for reference later. I was very lucky to find some acetate sheets in the same A4 size. So all I need to do now is trim off a strip that is 4.5 inches, which is the height of the album. I am making all three albums at the same time, so I am going to do everything 3 times. And of course, you could totally adjust these dimensions to whatever you want. This is just what I did. You'll also need to trim off a little off the length of this strip. So the A4 paper, I believe, is 11.7 inches long. We only need 10.5 inches. So you are going to trim a little strip off of one end, and then the height that you have now will be 4.5 inches. Next, we need to add in some score lines, and then that will create the folds that will turn this strip of acetate into a book shape. I'm going to use a scoreboard for that, and we'll be sure to link all of the products in the description box below. For the score lines, I'm actually just going to measure in 4 inches from each end of our long rectangle. I felt like that was a much more accurate way to do it rather than measuring 4 inches, 2.5 inches and having 4 inches left. I hope that makes sense. So I'm running the length of the rectangle. The first score will create the front cover, and then working from the other end of the rectangle, that second score will create the back cover, and the difference in between will end up being the spine. I am going to burnish all the creases and make sure they are nice and strong, and then because we're making 3 albums, I'm going to repeat that process 3 times. The acetate was a little bit tricky to work with, but I just had to be a little bit firm when I did the burnishing. So for my albums, of course, I'm using the Wildflower collection by Simple Stories, and it was at this point that I was sort of moving a little bit away from what Andrea had done, super inspired by it, but I knew that I wouldn't be following her albums like exactly, and as I go along, you can see that I make some different design choices. What I do really love about her albums is that they're sort of color blocked. So the first album is pink, the second one is blue, and then the third one is yellow, and I am going to be sticking with that because I really loved those numbers on the side that she had. I really loved the idea of the 3 albums being linked in some way. Side note, at this point I had no idea what I was going to be using the albums for. This was a bit of a passion project. I saw the blog post, I was super inspired by it, and I just wanted to make something pretty. So the covers are actually all going to be lined with printed paper, and I'm going to do 2 prints. So the outside of number 1 and number 3 are going to be florals, and then the outside of number 2 is a more geometric design, that blue one there up in the top left hand corner. The insides will be a contrasting pattern paper, still in that same color blocking. So each album needs 6 pieces of cardstock, so 2 for the front, 2 for the back, and 2 for the spine sections. The acetate is actually going to end up being sandwiched in between the pattern papers. I know I'm going to be adding a lot of stitching to these albums, so I'm going to attach everything with my ATG, and then I'll be able to add my stitching without worrying about that adhesive in my sewing machine. I do want to share here too that adding the pattern papers really helped sort of solidify the albums. They were quite loose and flimsy just being acetate, so I would recommend going with the 2 sheets of pattern paper and not just working with 1. It just adds a bit of structure to the album. Also, you'll need to be a little bit extra careful when trimming these rectangle shapes to make sure that they're all exactly the same size. I do have a trick for that, which I shared in a video about paper trimmers. I will leave that in the description box below. So you can see here how this is all coming together. There's my pink, blue and yellow albums, and I just repeated that process for the fronts, backs and centers. And here is the stitching. I've gone around each of the sections and added stitching with my sewing machine. It is now time to work on the inside, the book part. I know I've mentioned this before, but I am not really a measuring kind of gal, which is really weird considering I'm so particular about things like my T-square ruler and making sure everything is straight. Measurements though, me and math, we're not friends. So I'm doing a lot of lining up of the paper here and then just measuring with my pencil and trimming there. The pages do end up to be 4 1/4 high and the length ends up being 3 3/4 inches. But as you can see there, all I've done is measured it up against my album and marked it with a pencil and then trimmed at the pencil mark. These inserts are plain white American Crafts cardstock, and then I do also add in some inserts in the pattern papers, which you'll see here in a moment. So for consistency, each book is going to have 2 blocks of inserts. You can sort of see them there on the right. So 2 separate blocks of inserts, and within each of the blocks of inserts, I'm going to have 1 sheet of white cardstock and then 2 sheets of pattern paper. I'll flip through here and show you. So for this one, it has that gingham pattern paper on the outside, then white, and then the yellow floral. So pattern paper, white, pattern paper. I did run into a bit of a conundrum here though, because some of the pattern papers, whilst they had maybe blue on one side, then they would have yellow on the other. So it was sort of messing with my monochromatic color blocking system here. But I figured, you know what, I can work around that as we get decorating. I do need to have a bit of a think about how I'm actually going to assemble all of this. So in the meantime, I thought it might be a good opportunity to go through the collection and start gathering colors. So just seeing what kind of options I have for embellishments and bits and pieces that I can color block together for each of the albums. I'm just showing you there too. I was really keen on having little bits poking out of the album. So you'll see I've selected tags. I fussy cut out that little yellow flower. I'm super keen to have, lots of bits and pieces and interest happening within the albums themselves. I want them to be a little bit eclectic. With that done, I'm feeling confident and ready to move on to the next step. This was probably the most scary part of the whole process because I was super worried that if I messed it up, I would have to create the whole album cover again. Didn't want to do that. I'm going to create 4 holes in the center part of the cover, and to make sure that everything is really, really similar across the designs, see that little piece of washi tape there? That's my marker. I've just added it there to my T-square ruler as a measurement guide. And here I am taking the plunge. It is time. I just placed a very small pencil marker dot where I wanted the eyelet to be and then centered that dot within the crocodile there. So really, really happy with how neat and tidy all of that's looking. And I am going to add in some little eyelets for extra detail. I thought these guys were sort of done and dusted and I was never going to use them again on a project. And here we are. Do you still have eyelets in your stash? I had actually purged mine and I had to purchase these. How funny is that? Next up, I grabbed some of what my mother calls hat elastic. I believe it's used mainly for millinery. Very thin, quite light, and I'm going to figure out how I can thread it through the cover here to create 2 sort of loops of elastic, which the album inserts will then fit into. Initially, I thought I might secure the inserts in a very similar way to a traveler's notebook, where you can just slide them into those elastic sections. but for me, it didn't feel super secure. Maybe it would have been fine, but I just felt like I wanted it to be a little more locked into position, more like a book. What I ended up doing was positioning the insert and then marking with a pencil where those holes were. I had to get brave again and my crocodiles back out, and I punched 2 holes on those pencil lines. I was then able to thread the elastic through these holes, and that really helped lock everything in place. This elastic has quite a bit of stretch to it, so I was able to sort of position the inserts and then pull them quite tightly before tying the knot in the center. I just made sure that all of the knot parts, so both ends of the string, always ended up closing on the most inside part of those inserts. And you do see them in the finished album, but you'll see it sort of all fits together because I've added in my album lots of vintage fabrics and laces. So a little bit of elastic there and some ribbon just sort of fits with the theme. Now, of course, because I'm making 3 albums, I have to do all of that 3 times. The good news is that now that one is complete, I know exactly where I'm headed. I know exactly what I need to do. And I also have one that I can use as a guide, as a reference to just make sure they're all the same. I was also super lucky to be able to find eyelets that matched the collection really beautifully. There was a selection of pastel colors, and I've just stuck with this color blocking theme that I'm rolling with. So the blue album ends up with these very pretty blue flower eyelets. And the pink album ends up with these super sweet heart-shaped pink eyelets. I've repeated the process for all of the albums, just locking everything in place and making sure all of my knots are on the inside of those inserts. I wasn't super keen on the look of the elastics on the spine there, so what I did do was find some vintage trim and have threaded that through the spines to cover up that elastic. And yes, I did have to rethread the elastic, so if you want the ribbon, do them at the same time. Do ribbon and then the hat elastic and tie everything together. And here's the plan I have for the closure. I've added a rectangle strip and then just rounded the edges, and I've very heavily stitched that to the back cover of the albums. You can see here too that I have sort of made a start. There's a few pages that I have started to cover. I've added a little bit of trim and some paper layers, a few embellishments. You can sort of see how all the color themes are going to come together. This is really where the fun begins. The albums are built and now I get to embellish them and fill them with all kinds of pretty things. To secure the covers, I'm going to use a circle of Velcro, and I do want to find a vintage button. So the button won't actually be functioning. The Velcro will be what holds the album together, but it'll look cute because there'll be a button on top hiding the Velcro. You will need to sort a plan for that before you get decorating the cover too much, because you'll need to allocate space for it. I had to leave areas of the front cover quite empty so that the Velcro would sit nice and flat. So spoiler alert, they aren't even completely done yet, but I do want to share with you exactly where they're at right now. You can see that all the covers are done and the buttons are in place. There's the Velcro opening, and I have decorated a lot of the pages here. So I am going to give you a flip through so that you can see every single page and what's positioned where so far. I have somewhat taken them from a paper craft project to a little bit of a sewing, vintage, junk journaling, mini albumy thing. I still don't know what I'm going to use them for though, which is a bit of a bother. One idea I had was to create a mini album for each of us, my husband, myself, and our daughter, Katie. The other idea I thought was maybe to put some like really sweet inspirational quotes, some Bible verses that I love, and just make it like a pretty book. The other idea I had was to maybe use them to store my slow stitch projects. I love slow stitching, and I could make some really cute sort of 4x2 or 4x3 square blocks, slow stitch them, and then add them into the albums as I go. If you have an idea for what I should use them for, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. I haven't locked anything in yet, so yeah, I'm interested to know what you think. This is the blue one, and I love these little tabs that I made too. They were just from scraps, and I didn't have a lot of blue fabric in my stash, but I pulled what I could and then sort of boosted that with a little bit more of the white lace. I love how all the little bits and pieces extend out over the edges, and then you can see those sort of from the side of the album. There's so much texture and shape, and yeah, it's a really lovely album to flip through. And I have to say that this particular collection from Simple Stories is my favorite of theirs of all time. I love it so much, and I still have lots left to use, so I'm super excited about that. Here is a look through the yellow one. Did you see all those little threads too from the stitching? I added so much stitching into these pages. Oh my gosh. I did trim some of the ends off, but I did want to leave some of them because, again, I love that texture. I love that. I think that the threads add to that vintage handmade feel. I made sure to include lots of pockets in all of the albums as well. More of those fabric tabs there. Yeah, I wanted to have spaces where I could insert little tags like that one there, or like maybe cards, or just to give me options, because yes, I still don't know what I'm going to do with this. Lots more stitching to show you. I really feel like these projects are kind of like me encapsulated. There's so many parts of this that is just, very much a me project. It was, as I said earlier, a passion project, and I'm so grateful that I had the time and space and energy to be able to create it. Thank you so much for being here, my creative friends. If you like the way that I scrapbook or the way that I chat about the way that I scrapbook, I would love it if you give this video a thumbs up. I have a bunch more tutorial style videos on the channel, so be sure to check this one out right here, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, bye!